Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about what I like to call the female red pill or the pink pill. If you've heard of the Wizard Liz or Shira7 or any other dating or life coach online, then you likely know what I'm going to be referring to. And if you haven't, let's cue a quick montage.
I am not attracted to guys that have no money. I am simply not. I'm attracted to money. I'm attracted to power.
Ugly women ain't gonna find no true love. I promise you.
Get the mindset out of your head that wealthy or provider men want to control you.
Men should always pay for it.
One week a woman could have no job, the next week she could be married to a millionaire.
The more that I work, the more that I focus on working.
They should be blessed to sit in the same room as you. They should feel blessed to breathe the same air as you.
These videos I just showed you are likely not unfamiliar. They're everywhere, and they're both men and women espousing these kinds of ideas. And these individuals who preach these ideas echo the same sentiment, where womanhood is repackaged through a lens of empowerment, but yet still rest upon the same scaffolding of benevolent sexism, where our women and young girls are groomed to perfect the art of dependence, to pursue provision rather than purpose. These kinds of women, the Wizard Liz, Shira7, Sadia Khan, they don't encourage women to seek contribution, knowledge, resolve, to seek purpose or independence. They encourage them to seek being chosen. They breed nihilism, one which postures resignation and surrender as strategy, and they cast all men as inherently faithless and women as inherently commodified. So what is their solution to this nihilistic perspective that they painted of men? Objectify in return. If women are reduced to their bodies, if they're reduced to their appearance, if they're reduced to being objectified, then let women reduce men to their wallets. Thus emerges a duality in which each party holds contempt for the other, and it breeds a dynamic of transaction, hostility, and suspicion of each other. And these life coaches, these dating coaches, they frame these ideologies as if they are liberating, as if things like the sprinkle sprinkle movement are what we should chase, as if it'll make us happier or give us easier lives. However, this is not liberation. It's an endless loop of fear and demonization. Women only convinced that men seek pleasure, and men convinced that women only seek resources. And each party, both men and women, are simultaneously guarding against this presumed betrayal, this assumed objectification while fulfilling the caricatures they hate. And these female influencers who propagate these ideologies are only exacerbating the cycle. They draw arbitrary blueprints of femininity or what it means to be a woman, and then they stick a price tag on it. And women are told they are the prize, while men are the bidders. However, what is truly being auctioned here is not love, fulfillment, or emotional maturity. It's a woman's own independence and purpose traded for handbags and status symbols. This video is going to be based off of my Substack article, Men Are Not Wallets and Women Are Not Prizes. Of course, everyone can go and read the article if you prefer to do that instead. I think what I wrote was a bit better than how I'm going to articulate it on video. However, I'm going to do a little bit of improv in this video and add some things that I didn't previously add into my article. And especially within the last section, I'm going to talk about what it truly means to be a high-value man or a high-value woman and what these things entail, and how I think most people tend to misrepresent them or misunderstand what it truly means to be high value. However, I'm going to give the same disclaimer that I gave in my article. I filmed this video not with the intention of disparaging the women who perpetuate these messages, nor with the intention of disparaging those who find guidance in their words. I'm filming this, basing it off of my article because I feel like it needs to reach more people. I'm recording this to show the harm, to show how this ideology mirrors the same black pill nihilism it claims to oppose. These lines of thinking are born of fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of labor, fear of betrayal, fear of true independence. It is a coping mechanism which inevitably ends up attracting the same men it hopes to ward off, and what ends up happening is it reinforces its own prophecy. And before we get into this video, I am not here to coach. I cannot ensure you pick the right person whether you're a man or a woman watching this video, but I can guide and remind women, and men as well, that relationships do not need to be built on reductionist values of fear and transaction, and that love, when approached with dignity, devotion, maturity, and vulnerability, is beautiful and immensely fulfilling. There are good men out there, trust me, I have met them, I have engaged with them, but they are not found by commodifying yourself or by distrusting them or being hateful towards them. They are found when you strive to be a whole and a self-actualized human being. So let's get into it. We're going to start off by mapping the ideology and why it mirrors the male red pill. And then we're going to get into why it's so psychologically persuasive, why so many people feel compelled to follow it and convinced by it. And then what I'm going to do is give you the philosophical counter. I'm essentially going to draw upon different philosophers from different time periods and show you what self-actualization actually looks like to them and why this ideology is harmful. And then we're going to refute essentially the female red pills or the pink red pills' biggest claims against men or against relationships or against against dating and marriage and so forth. Things like all men cheat, or provision proves love, or this idea that woman must be the prize and men are the chasers, and that emotional detachment is power. And then finally, I'm going to offer my own model for what I believe to be healthier for love and selecting a partner. And then we're also going to get into what it truly means to be a high value individual and why I feel like most people tend to misrepresent this. And in their misrepresentation, they end up being very sexist or reinforcing misogynistic ideas of womanhood. So now let's begin. If you see me looking down at my screen, it's because I have my article right in front of me and I'm going to be reading off of some parts of it. But what is the female red pill? What do I mean when I say that, and what does it entail? What I mean when I say female red pill is I'm essentially paralleling it to the male red pill that we see from individuals like, Andrew Tate or Myron Gaines. And don't get me wrong, it lacks the explicit aggression and violence of its male counterpart. The male red pill is objectively more harmful. However, it doesn't change the fact that it still runs on the same line of reasoning and rhetoric. Two things can be ideologically similar, but how they manifest and how they express themselves can differ. The male red pill borrows its name from the movie The Matrix, and if you've watched it, you'll understand that it functions as a metaphor for waking up to the harsh truths of reality. In the case of the male red pill, it's referring to waking up to the harsh truths about female nature, about dating, about gender dynamics, about hierarchies. And again, if you're on the internet, the ideology should sound familiar. Essentially, women are inherently hypergamous, they value men for money, status, therefore men should objectify them, using women as sex objects and assessing them primarily on appearance. And under the male red pill, men are the valuable party by virtue of the fact that they are the provisioners. They are the prize and they are meant to be chased. Whereas women who provide no value beyond sex, child rearing, or appearance should be the chasers. They have to compete for them. They should be pure, they should perform tradition, and they should tolerate infidelity as male nature. And essentially, under this framework, love is not real. Love, marriage, relationships, they're merely transactional. And similarly, the pink pill mirrors this kind of posture, except that I believe that it has more softer rhetoric and it's more palatable. It urges women to wake up to male nature, which is framed as something inherently oppressive, sexual, unfaithful, and undisciplined, and to answer their objectification with a counter. If men reduce us to bodies, then reduce them to their wallets. And under this ideology, they posture femininity as this narrow, purchasable ideal. Women who are high value essentially perfect their performance, cater to the male ego, and manipulate provision from a position of emotional detachment. Likewise, they also think they are the prize and they are to be chased. And again, likewise, men are invaluable beyond the money they bring to the table. And love does not exist, only transaction. And most people don't realize it at first, but this is the same exact hierarchy, it's the same exact reasoning, it's the same exact rhetoric. The only distinction between them is the way that they are delivered. I've noticed that a lot of the female influencers who propagate this ideology tend to do it in a way that's a lot more palatable, and it kind of goes under your nose. And what also goes under your nose and goes unnoticed is the cost of subscribing to this kind of ideology or rhetoric. When you pursue arbitrary values or traits that essentially orbit men and still continue to center men, you end up upholding the same status quo that you claim to despise. And these people who subscribe to this ideology genuinely believe that their conclusions are logical and rational, that men truly are inherently corrupt and their payment provides reparations. But this is literally just cope. It's a psychological protection. It is a fear-based coping mechanism. That is why it is so persuasive and why so many people can grift and profit off of this fear. Betrayal and trauma is chaotic, especially when we fear it, and we try to preemptively avoid it. It's because betrayal is chaotic and rules are calming. This is a common psychological phenomenon. If you've gone through any kind of trauma or abuse, whatever it may be, you end up developing this need for hyper control. That's why trauma, for example, can sometimes cause people to develop OCD or paranoid personality disorder. Take, for example, if someone's been cheated on, they likely end up developing behaviors where they'll consistently go through their partner's phone, they'll be paranoid, they won't trust their partner with other people, and they do all of this in an attempt to avoid being hurt again. They create this illusion of control. They think if I can manage every single variable, then I won't be cheated on again. This kind of hurt won't ever happen to me again. When that's just not the case. If you've been cheated on, it has nothing to do with you. If someone wants to cheat, they will cheat, irrespective of how meticulous you are. We read our suffering and our trauma and the things that happen to us, especially things like betrayal, as a failure of vigilance, rather than reading it for what it truly was, which was the person we loved did a bad thing, and it wasn't caused by us. And just like our compulsions, ideologies promise a script like do X, never do Y, demand Z, and they offer an illusion of safety. Some people falsely believe that if we can reduce individuals, in this particular context men, to a set of rules and tactics, then we can't be blindsided, that we won't end up getting in a relationship where we're abused, where we're cheated on, where we're betrayed. But that kind of perspective is merely emotional insulation, it's not reality, and it most certainly is not intimacy. And some girls like to portray this as just being pragmatic or being realistic. When you assume the worst of men in advance, you convince yourself that you can emotionally detach from the outcome, or at the very least relationally control it. But this is just preemptive cynicism. When you presume betrayal, then you will begin to read ambiguity as evidence. And beyond the psychology of classic schema confirmation or fear-based coping mechanisms, my personal interpretation of this ideology and people who subscribe to it is that they likely have traumas relating to financial instability or systemic oppression. So for example, what I've noticed is that people who grew up in persistent economic precarity, or who are currently struggling financially, or who are seeking stability, are often the ones adopting this kind of ideology. And on top of that, I think marginalized or oppressed groups also tend to be ones subscribing to this kind of ideology. Historically subjugated groups tend to show higher rates of depression than privileged groups after achieving independence. And I think this newfound freedom is likely frightening, especially for women navigating systems that were not originally built for them. Autonomy and independence demand effort. You have to put work into them. They require growth, judgment, and most importantly, the cherry on top, responsibility. And being dependent, especially on a man financially, offers a tempting exit, a relinquishment of duty. It narrows agency to something smaller and more manageable. However, although it's easier, what these women don't realize is that in fleeing the burden of freedom, you end up accepting the comforts of captivity. You trade financial independence for the balm of financial security and the evasion of accountability, much like how a captive-bred animal returns to its cage even when the door is open. And then this turns into a bigger issue where fear turns into this internalized objectification. Luxury becomes a signal that says, I am worth choosing. These ideologies tell women that they should be receiving like expensive handbags and expensive dates and so forth while they're being courted by men. They are being told to outsource their value externally. And this creates an illusion of intrinsic worth because material signals displace moral ones. And since women have traditionally been treated as objects of evaluation, they learn to evaluate themselves the same way, subconsciously asking themselves, am I a trophy worth buying and mounting on a shelf? And so what ends up happening is women start to focus on optics, how they present themselves, their image, their self, their internal self becomes a project of curation. They're no longer focusing on bettering themselves individually. They're focusing on bettering themselves so that they can get a partner who can provide for them. And on the topic of why it's so psychologically persuasive, it weaponizes women's deepest insecurities and structural inequalities. And that is why it's so rhetorically magnetic. Not to mention people like the Wizard Liz or Shira 7, they're very charismatic, they're very confident people. And that certainty and confidence is far more appealing than nuance or pragmatism. Simple rules, rage bait, and being extreme is what lures people in. And not to mention, because these creators are economically incentivized, they're going to sideline anything that sounds nuanced. To them, whatever sells is true. And by extension of that, the people who subscribe to their ideology want the advice to be true because they want the life that it promises. And then that influencer or creator lives off of that want. It's a bi-directional loop. And there's a reason this script continuously fails. Kindly take the Wizard Liz and Shira 7 as examples. Treat love as a transaction and a price tag, and you attract partners who prefer transactions and price tags. Men who want deep intimacy anchored in mutual respect in a self-actualized partnership will naturally filter out. They don't share the same values. Why would a man who desires a truly fulfilling relationship choose someone cynical, methodical, and disingenuous? And thus, naturally, the bad faith men who merely want transactions filter in. And this dating pool of men that you curated, that you don't realize you curated, inevitably confirms the initial premises you started with and reinforces the very caricature you resented, and now you think all men are like this. Not because they truly are, but because you engineered conditions for those who are. And especially when you employ things like intermittent reinforcement or dark feminine techniques or emotional detachment. These all make it worse. Men who desire safety and stability and true love are naturally going to leave. And those who enjoy instability, chaos, and toxicity will stay. And because this ideology positions money as the proxy and being chosen as the primary telos, other crucial values like devotion, loyalty, knowledge, friendship, and service all atrophy. Neither party is now focused on cultivating character, courage, or empathy. And we end up having a society anchored in these proxies, which inevitably hollows into nihilism, creating a moral foundation of everyone uses everyone, and ethics become ornamental. So what is the solution? The first step out of this is empathy. Understanding that most people who follow this logic are not malicious, they're hurt. They translate their pain from infidelity, financial instability, trauma, etc. into procedure. To them, their logic feels like maturity and protection. But there is a distinct difference between prudence and discernment, and being purely pessimistic. Prudence tests for character, and discernment judges character, merely refining selection. Whereas pessimism, on the other hand, preemptively assumes the absence of character and rules out possibility altogether. And to break the cycle, one must understand why they choose the script, and then change the model, screen for different things, and interpret cues differently. And by extension, the outcomes change. By giving you the psychological model, by helping you understand why I think some people subscribe to it, why it's so convincing, why it works algorithmically, how creators are incentivized to push these kinds of things online. This should help you see the issue. The first step, psychologically, to becoming a better person, to improving yourself, to moving forward, is realizing the problem. Because we can't have any further conversation if you don't first realize what the problem is. How do you solve a math problem if I don't give you the problem? Now let me give you the philosophical counter. Let's look at things through a philosophical lens. I want to show you what actualization looks like from the mouths of the greats. This is going to be a long section and I'm going to be reading off of the quotes from my screen, but I'll try and make it go as quick as possible. Let's start off first with Plato. Plato's Republic is an archive of some of Plato's work, and it seeks to define justice and show that the just life is happier and better than the unjust. I think I have about 5 quotes in here from Plato's Republic. The first quote will relate to how Red Pill often confuses emotional detachment and numbness for wisdom, and call a neutral cynical state happiness. Plato states, and I quote, "Then you can wonder that persons who are inexperienced in the truth, as they have wrong ideas about many other things, should also have wrong ideas about pleasure and pain and the intermediate state, so that when they are only being drawn towards the painful, they feel pain and think the pain which they experience to be real, and in like manner, when drawn away from pain to the neutral or intermediate state, they firmly believe that they have reached the goal of satiety and pleasure. They, not knowing pleasure, err in contrasting pain with the absence of pain, which is like contrasting black with gray instead of white." Plato's point here is simple and devastating. People who do not know of truth confuse moving away from pain into a neutral state with genuine real pleasure. For example, let's say you move from being in a state of extreme poverty to being very low middle class. You have not achieved genuine financial freedom, but you believe that you have because you don't know anything better, and because you are in a state of less discomfort. Plato here draws a clear distinction between mere cessation of discomfort, such as how scratching an itch provides relief, and positive fulfillment of the soul. If your reference point is pain, neutrality feels like bliss in spite of it not reflecting true flourishment of the soul. And much like Red Pill rhetoric, these people point to the absence of crisis inside a transactional arrangement. For example, look at all the money he provides for me, look at all the cars he gives me, or the handbags he gives me, and they declare victory, when in fact they have not only stalled their soul's development, but they have also stalled development and flourishment of their relationship. In another passage, Plato writes, and I quote, "Those then who know not wisdom and virtue, and are always busy with gluttony and sensuality, go down and up as far as the mean. And in this region they move at random throughout their life, but they never pass into the true upper world. They neither look nor do they find their way, neither are they truly filled with true being, nor do they taste of pure and abiding pleasure. Like cattle with their eyes always looking down and their heads stooping to the earth, that is, to the dining table, they fatten and feed and breed. And in their excessive love of these delights, they kick and butt at one another, with horns and hoofs which are made of iron, and they kill one another by reason of their insatiable lust, for they fill themselves with that which is not substantial, and the part of themselves which they fill is also unsubstantial and incontent." This is a commentary on consumption, how those devoted to gluttony and sensuality shuttle up and down a midline, never reaching the quote-unquote upper world, which is referring to truth. They graze like cattle, fight each other, and remain insatiable because they fill themselves with what is not real. Essentially, a life, or a relationship in this context, centered around consumption and transaction breeds this scarcity-thinking rivalry and inner emptiness. Like cattle, red pillars keep their heads down and kick and butt at one another instead of lifting their eyes to higher goods. A transactional bond can never yield pure and abiding pleasure because it never touches the soul's contact with virtue. This next passage is by far one of my favorite out of the few that I'll mention in this video. And it says, and I quote, "Then how would a man profit if he received gold and silver on the condition that he was to enslave the noblest part of him to the worst? Who can imagine that a man who sold his son or daughter into slavery for money, especially if he sold them into the hands of fierce and evil men, would be the gainer? How large might be the sum of which he received? And will anyone say that he is not a miserable caitiff who remorselessly sells his own divine being to that which is most godless and detestable?" Arifalé took the necklace as the price of her husband's life, but he is taking a bribe in order to compass a worse ruin. End quote. What is being communicated in this passage is that wealth is of no profit if it costs the soul, enslavement of the noblest part to the worst. Plato draws analogies between, for example, selling your child to a vicious master, or the Greek myth of Arifalé accepting a necklace to betray her husband. And very similarly, trading one's independence and dignity for financial provision is the same bargain coated in varnish. It reinforces the system that made the trade seem valuable, only to discard you when the market turns, such as women being told to sell their dignity in exchange for becoming a trophy wife. And no amount of material gain can compensate for that level of degradation. Any deal that buys externals to the ruler within is a net loss, no matter the price, even if it is being a trophy wife. And while Plato is a bit misogynistic, I haven't included the quotes in here for the sake of brevity, but he also still insists that women share the same nature and capacities as men, that women should also be educated and involved accordingly. And this is the crude hard truth. You do not bring value to society or to yourself by being an ornament, because when you are an ornament, you are just that. You are merely an embellishment of someone else, nothing more or less. Now, the next one I want to get into is Aristotle, and he likewise also possessed some traditionalistic and at times misogynistic perspectives on women and their roles within society, but nonetheless his ethics provide guidance and perspective regarding human aims and virtue and so forth. Quote, "Every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action and pursuit, is thought to aim at some good, and for this reason the good has rightly been declared to be that which all things aim. But a certain difference is found among ends. Some are activities and others are products apart from the activities that produce them." So essentially what this passage is intended to communicate is a message regarding human aims, that all humans have a desire for some good. It is a simple teleological claim that actions are ordered by ends. However, not all ends are the same. Some ends are activities in themselves, and other ends are products that exist independent from the activity. And activities that are ends in themselves are more choice-worthy and fulfilling than activities done merely for products, by virtue of the fact that the value is intrinsic to the activity. So for example, what should be more important when I'm building a house is not the actual end product of the house, but learning to build it. In the context of red pill ideologies, money functions as a product, not a final end. Provision is instrumentally useful, such as a house is after building, but it is not the telos of a life or a relationship. These ideologies conflate means and ends. In this context, love is meant to be the activity, where the beauty of a relationship is found in consistent practice, such as mutual respect, truth-telling, care, and shared labor, rather than in trophies or wealth, and these things are products. Dynamics that are built upon traditionalism or red pill rhetoric often fall short in this respect. They redefine intimacy as a sequence of transactions aimed at external products, and they downshift the relationship from an intrinsic good, the activity, to an instrumental exchange. And this guarantees a lack of fulfillment, it guarantees a lack of emptiness and unhappiness even when the product is attained. The next quote, "The life of money-making is one undertaken under compulsion, and wealth is evidently not the good we are seeking, for it is merely useful and for the sake of something else." What Aristotle is essentially communicating here is that money is not a final goal. We simply pursue it as a means, not as an end that we should choose for its own sake. It is entirely instrumental, and by this virtue it cannot be the highest human good. Thus, positioning money as the measure of a relationship is inherently unproductive. The next quote, "For the originating causes of the things that are done consist in the end at which they are aimed. But the man who has been ruined by pleasure or pain forthwith fails to see any such originating cause, to see that for the sake of this or because of this he ought to choose and do whatever he chooses and does. For vice is destructive of the originating cause of action. Practical wisdom, then, must be a reasoned and true state of capacity to act with regard to human goods. There being two parts of the soul that can follow a course of reasoning, it must be the virtue of one of the two. That is, the part which forms opinions, for opinion is about the variable, and so is practical wisdom. But yet is not only a reasoned state. This is shown by the fact that a state of that sort may forgotten, but practical wisdom cannot." Aristotle's work here is very, very messy, so if you don't understand it, don't take it personally. If I remember correctly, Nicomachean Ethics was a collection of his lectures. So they're not very organized and they're not very clear, but that's why I'm here to help you understand. So what he's saying here is that ends are the originating causes of actions. Simply put, we act because of the goal we deem to be good. The end is what gives a choice its point. When someone is ruined by pleasure or by pain, their compass and their ability to navigate sense of ends is damaged, causing them to falter in their choices. What instead is true and reasonable is to act well about human goods, to have sound judgments in variable situations about how to reach worthwhile ends. And Aristotle denotes this as practical wisdom. There are two categories that Aristotle divides the rational soul into: the scientific, which is concerned with unchanging truths, and the calculative part, which is concerned with changeable matters. Of the two categories, he places practical wisdom into the latter. Rules can be memorized and later forgotten, but practical wisdom is a stable disposition, one formed by habituated virtue and the right perception of good. It is a lived discernment. And so the relevance of this is, when our fears, pains, and pleasures determine the target, we end up failing to see the real end. And what happens is we pick tactics that optimize the wrong goals. Real flourishing and reason, in the context of intimate relationships, is not about a list of tricks and scripts. It's the ability to read particular situations in light of human goods, and then act accordingly. It is to separate your vice in order to prevent distortion of your sense of ends and make wise decisions. So what I'm saying here is separate yourself from your trauma, separate yourself from your hatred of men, your experience in relationships, separate yourself from your vice, all of these things that distort our sense of ends, so that you can be capable of discernment and picking the right person. Because when you allow all these things to cloud your judgment, to cloud your sense of ends, that is what ends up making you pick the wrong person. And when you implement practical wisdom effectively, it keeps means in their place. Wealth and status can serve a good life, but they are not the good life. The next quote: "For without friends no one would choose to live, though he had all other goods. Even rich men and those in possession of office and of dominating power are thought to need friends most of all. For what is the use of such prosperity without the opportunity of beneficence, which is exercised chiefly, and in its most laudable form, towards friends? Or how can prosperity be guarded and preserved without friends?" This quote will reinforce a value of mine that you will see consistently throughout this video, that love is a basic good and necessity, not just some luxury. Even if someone had every external advantage, from fame to power to wealth, life is not choice-worthy without friends. Wealth and power only become meaningful when they let you practice virtues, such as generous goodwill towards said friends. And furthermore, companions help you preserve a good life through their loyalty and good aid. And the right partner is nothing short of a friend. They are your best friend, and no amount of materialism can replace a friend who is honorable, loyal, and virtuous towards you. Relationships are where materialism finds its purpose, serving the good of those we love, not purchasing them. And again, another quote that relates to this: "Now it looks as if love were a feeling, friendship a state of character, for love may be felt just as much towards lifeless things, but mutual love involves choice, and choice springs from a state of character. And men wish well to those whom they love, not as a result of feeling, but as a result of a state of character. And in loving a friend, men love what is good for themselves. For a good man, in becoming a friend, becomes a good to his friend. Each then both loves what is good for himself, and makes an equal return in goodwill and in pleasantness. For friendship is said to be equality, and both of these are found in the friendship of the good." Now keep in mind here, I'm interpreting all of these philosophers' work, including Plato and Aristotle's, in a way to help articulate my own view. What I am communicating here about relationships and how it relates to what I'm talking about might not be necessarily what they believe, but it helps explain what I believe. So what is being said here is loving one's friends is a state of character formed by choice and virtue. Real love and friendship is not a passive emotion. It is a chosen goodwill toward the other for their sake, grounded in who you are, not just how you feel. It is a mutual good built upon equality and reciprocity, not leverage or asymmetry. Relationships which are built upon tactics and transactions are unstable, completely going against what Aristotle believes to be the right kind of love, a practice of character. Friendship intertwined with love and built upon virtue is not unequal. Both individuals are the prize, and neither individual is treated as an instrument. Basically, what I believe is love is not a feeling you catch or a deal you cut. It is a chosen reciprocity where both people will the good for each other as equals. And when you have someone who treats your relationship as a partnership, as if you are their own friend, as if you are their equal, and wills good for you, there is nothing more rewarding in this world. And so when you get into a relationship, your goal should not be transaction, it should not be money, it should not be these arbitrary things that the red pill rhetoric or pink pill rhetoric tells you that you should value. When you get into a relationship, your goal should be cultivating an actualized relationship and seeking true love and fulfillment within each other. Now moving on to the next philosopher, it will be Karl Marx from his German ideology. Quote, "The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas. That is, the class which is the ruling material force of society is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. The ruling ideas are nothing more than an ideal of expression of the dominant material relationships. The dominant material relationships grasped as ideas, hence of the relationships which make the one class the ruling one, therefore the ideas of its dominance. The individuals composing the ruling class possess among other things consciousness and therefore think." What Marx is communicating in this passage is how power imbalances shape thought. In every era of history, the group that controls material power tends to control the intellectual climate, such as what counts as normal, natural, realistic, or empowering. These comprise the ruling ideas. However, they are not grounded in objective truth. They are idealized parallels of the existing social and economic structure. They frame existing hierarchies as inevitable and crucially as good. And similarly, these online coaching guidelines are not subversive. They are ornate and intricate confirmations of the status quo, coded in benevolence. By grooming women to perfect dependence, that is, be the prize, extract provision, perform purchasable femininity, the ideology rebrands traditional subordination and subjugation of women in a more palatable way. However, such an ideology still centers men and shrinks women. Where the metric of success is male approval and male resources, women believe that in order to attain wealth and status, they must do it through a man, rather than independently. Women are further cast as objects of male desire, and curators of a dark feminine strategic persona, not as agents with projects. And what this does is it maintains attention on what the ruling script wants: appearance, submission, docility, deference, rather than women cultivating skill and intellect. It draws upon arbitrary blueprints rather than individual flourishing. The resulting quote-unquote high-value feminine is an ideological script. Look expensive, be passive, be obedient, play cold, and never fall in love. And allow me some warranted harshness here. While other women found companies, pursue PhDs, buy land, build independent wealth, people who adhere to female red pill or the pink pill instead focus on mastering tricks to coerce a quote-unquote high-value male into provision. This is not remotely strategic in the way that it's framed. It's not impressive, it's not admirable. It is a ridiculous and meaningless aim postured as wisdom. And this is precisely how ruling ideas work and why these ideologies reinforce them. These influencers sell ideological compliance in exchange for upholding the same order that disadvantaged women. Men remain the dispensers of value and legitimacy, and women remain inferior and ornamental. And calling it life or dating advice is simply laundering misogyny through the optics of benevolence. Now that I've got that out, let's move to the next quote. "The division of labor manifests itself also in the ruling class as the division of mental and material labor, so that one part appears as the thinkers of the class, its conceptive ideologists who make the perfecting of the class's illusion their livelihood, while the others' attitude to these ideas is more passive. In a practical collision which endangers the class, this opposition comes to nothing, and with it the semblance that the ruling ideas had a power distinct from the power of this class." This particular excerpt from Karl Marx discusses the division inside of the ruling class where labor is distributed into two parts. One which focuses on the material work and another which focuses on the mental work. The latter focuses on constructing a flattering worldview of the class, making a living off of selling self-illusion as to why such a power structure is natural, inevitable, and moral. The working class, being too busy to theorize or gather amongst each other, end up merely absorbing the ideology and accepting it. And influencers or coaches are today's conceptive ideologists, the ones who do the mental work. They package dependence as empowerment and monetize courses and personas, and they do not allow nuance to change their narrative. And the people who follow them, much like the working class, perform the self-illusioned lifestyle and reproduce the script. Contempt and bickering and arguing, especially between men and women in these red pill spaces, doesn't dismantle this hierarchy that dehumanizes us both. Revolutionary ideas in themselves are not sufficient to overturn long-term power structures. They require a base, a revolutionary class to emerge. The work requires us to step outside of the market grammar of intimacy, to refuse the roles that have been attributed to us of wallet and trophy, and build a different base. A base in which both parties are oriented towards skill, agency, virtue, and reciprocity, not performative compliance with ruling ideas. That was all from Karl Marx. I saved one of the greater interpretations for second to last, which is Simone de Beauvoir, as I believe she is essential in the point I'm trying to make in this entire video. All of these excerpts are going to be from The Second Sex, and she articulates everything in here so masterfully. I encourage you to read it in its entirety, and likewise I also encourage you to read Plato's Republic or Nicomachean Ethics or the German ideology in its entirety as well. The first quote, "Thus humanity is male, and man defines woman not in herself but as relative to him. She is not regarded as an autonomous being. Man can think of himself without woman, she cannot think of herself without man, and she is simply what man decrees. Thus she is called the sex, by which it is meant that she appears essentially to the male as a sexual being. For him she is sex, absolute sex, no less. She is defined and differentiated with reference to a man, and not he with reference to her. She is the incidental, the inessential as opposed to the essential. He is the subject, he is the absolute, she is the other." In a patriarchal frame and within contemporary society, humanity defaults to male. Man is the benchmark of the human, while woman is defined only in relation to him. Women are additionally seen primarily through a sexualized lens, while men instead enjoy a broader, unmarked humanity. In relation to pink pill rhetoric, when a woman's value is defined with reference to male desire, scripts that require performance of femininity or extraction of provision are not subversive. They perfect that otherness. They keep women as objects to be chosen or paid, rather than individual subjects. Now, in relation to this quote, I personally think there's a bit of nuance to this. I don't like taking the extreme view that it's wrong for women to perform for men or to seek male approval. Like, I feel like today most people frame women seeking male approval as something inherently bad. And I don't think it is. As human beings with an inclination towards relations and sex, we naturally want to be desired and preferred by the opposite sex. And this kind of want is not intrinsically bad, and neither is catering to it, whether you're a man or a woman. But when a woman's life and self becomes grounded in the purpose of seducing the opposite sex, and her worth is defined by this is when it becomes deeply problematic. This becomes a woman's social essence, and femininity now drifts towards ornament and transaction, which is the philosophical root of trophy wife logic and the contemporary climate of dating. Simone de Beauvoir also writes, "In proving woman's inferiority, the anti-feminists then began to draw not only upon religion, philosophy, and theology as before, but also upon science, biology, experimental psychology, etc. At most, they were willing to grant equality in difference to the other sex. That profitable formula is most significant. It is precisely like the equal but separate formula of the Jim Crow laws aimed at the North American..." Not gonna say that word. But here Beauvoir discusses how the case for woman's inferiority consistently appeals to different disciplines and rhetoric, and at this point in time it appeals to science, selective biology, and crude psychology. And this is kind of relevant because I've noticed that some of these coaches, Saadia Khan for example, has preached this kind of idea that women are different but equal, and that is why they require provision and sustenance, which I think also the Wizard Liz and Shira 7 have also said. But basically they draw these like arbitrary blueprints of femininity and masculinity, and not only are these things typically non-objective and anti-intellectual interpretations of science, they are rhetorical traps. They reinforce benevolent hierarchy. They promise honor, provision, and protection, but keep women in roles defined by male needs, like ornament, nurturer, dependent. And these roles are now justified as natural differences. These life coaches draw upon non-essentialist frameworks for defining the feminine and the masculine, and then go on to say that they are indeed essential. And they harm both of these groups with pseudoscience. For example, this idea that men are natural providers and women are natural receivers. What? If you study anything about evolutionary biology or anthropology, whatever it may be, you will understand this is such a disingenuous oversimplification, and such poor scientific reductions extend beyond this example. Anyways, moving on, next quote. "Now, woman has always been man's dependent, if not his slave. The two sexes have never shared the world in equality. To decline to be the other, to refuse to be a party in the deal, this would be for woman to renounce all the advantages conferred upon them by their alliance with the superior caste. Man the sovereign will provide woman the liege with material protection and will undertake the moral justification of her existence. Thus she can evade at once both economic risk and metaphysical risk of a liberty in which ends and aims must be contrived without assistance. Indeed, along with the ethical urge of each individual to affirm his subjective existence, there is also the temptation to forego liberty and become a thing. This is an inauspicious road, for he who takes it, passive, lost, ruined, becomes henceforth the creature of another's will, frustrated in his transcendence and deprived of every value. But it is an easy road. On it, one avoids the strain involved in undertaking an authentic existence. Beauvoir is mapping the psychology of dependence here. It relates back to the analogy drawn earlier by Plato of how exchanging freedom for security is similar to one selling his child to a detestable man. Of course, an arrangement of dependence offers perks. It spares women of two kinds of risk: the economic burden of self-support and the metaphysical burden of freedom, that is, choosing ends for yourself. However, while I can agree that one path is easier, that is, it's easier to have someone take care of you, to make choices for you, to control your finances, that path is also existentially ruinous. You might gain comfort, but you end up sacrificing your authorship. You avoid strain, but at the cost of your value as a self-determining individual. It feels safe because it is, much like a display case. The next and final quote from Beauvoir is, "In particular, those who are condemned to stagnation are often pronounced happy on the pretext that happiness consists in being at rest. Every time transcendence falls back into immanence, stagnation, there is a degradation of existence into the en soi, the brutish life of the subjugation to given conditions, and of liberty into constraint and contingence. This downfall represents a moral fault if the subject consents to it. If it is inflicted upon him, it spells frustration and oppression." End quote. This quote relates to the previous quote. Beauvoir is warning against mistaking comfort for flourishing. Within her philosophy, transcendence is our capacity to project aims and author a life, while immanence is being fixed to prescribed roles. When transcendence collapses back into immanence, that is, when an individual stops choosing and simply rests inside conditions, freedom is reduced to mere constraint and contingency. Life coaches and dating coaches propagate scripts that sell dependence or ornamental quote-unquote femininity as something that is palatable. No bills, no risk, clear roles. But this is still shrinkage, whether you consent to that stagnation or it is forcefully imposed. But consenting to that stagnation is far worse, because it is a stagnation of the self. Relief is not eudaimonia, and the absence of motion is not the presence of life. As the aforementioned and later philosophers propone, excellence is expected in leading a virtuous and fulfilling life. Now for the final philosopher, Marcus Aurelius. Stoicism is central to Aurelius's thought. And if you haven't looked into Stoicism, I highly suggest you do. I think it could be really helpful for people who feel lost, but nonetheless, I digress. We won't get into Stoicism entirely or the metaphysics of the logos because it's very complex, so we'll focus on merely the virtues of character that Aurelius preached again and again in his meditations. And likewise, like with the other pieces of work, I encourage you to read it in its entirety. I think it can be very beneficial. The first quote is simple and sweet. "Thou hast power over thy mind, not outside events. Realize this and thou wilt have strength." End quote. In this quote, Aurelius is centering control as a stoic virtue. The only things truly within our power are judgment and character. If something doesn't harm either, then it cannot harm you. Externals and materialism are far outside of our governance. They are impressions, nothing more or less, whose value is contingent upon the judgments we assign them. Viewing the world in this way allows us to exercise control over our perception and protects our mind from error, maintains objectivity, and guards us from harm. Sprinkle, Sprinkle, and things like it outsource security from a man's wallet to tension and marriage, and this contradicts the values that Aurelius holds. Strength is rooted in sovereignty over your own mind and choices, not mastery over someone else's. You are not strong, you are not successful because you managed to coerce a man into paying for you, or because you managed to coerce a man into taking care of you. And obsessing over curating the perfect man, the perfect relationship, the perfect life only leads judgment astray and down an erroneous path. Oh, I'm so tired. You guys have no idea how hard it is to film these videos. Woo! My makeup is eating. Anyways, to the next quote. "What then is that which is able to conduct a man? One thing and only one, philosophy. But this consists in keeping the daemon within a man free from violence and unharmed, superior to pains and pleasures, doing nothing without purpose, nor yet falsely and with hypocrisy, not feeling the need of another man's doing or not doing anything, and besides accepting all that happens and all that it is allotted, wherever it is from whence he himself came, and finally waiting for death with a cheerful mind, as being nothing else than a dissolution of the elements of which every living being is compounded. If then the elements do not suffer anything by continually changing one into another, why should a man have any apprehension about the change and dissolution of all the elements? For this is according to nature, and nothing is evil which is according to nature." In this quote, and for Aurelius, there is a one-to-one relationship between philosophy and self-governance. And this is only attainable by keeping the inner self objective, unmoved by pain or pleasure, free of hypocrisy and acting with purpose. Peace should not be contingent upon the external and material, but rather contingent upon reason and virtue. Another essential pillar to Aurelius' thought is acceptance of nature's order, accepting change and death as they come, to not fear them, as this fear is merely confusion about what is in our control. Change, loss, and morality, these are all natural. They are not intrinsically evil. And this relates back to the nihilistic loop that many influencers and coaches reel us into. When one understands their duty as purposeful action and acceptance of what cannot be controlled, cynical resignation is overpowered. Stoic discipline can help recenter the aim on flourishing rather than optics or becoming an object that can be purchased. 2 more quotes, both that are short and sweet. The first one is, "What is not good for the swarm is not good for the bee." This quote is kind of intuitive. When dependence is portrayed as empowerment, it embeds a standard that diminishes all women by extension. Choosing to be dependent is not merely an individual choice. It is a deliberate selling of an ideology, one which marketizes femininity for personal gain, eroding the dignity and possibilities of those who refuse that script, of those who refuse that role. And humans are much like bees. We move as a swarm. When young generations look upon the ideologies being spread, they too reduce themselves in the opposite gender to this reductionist and objectified perception. They too continue the cycle. The next quote and the final quote that I think a lot of people need to hear, especially people who subscribe to this ideology, is, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." This is also intuitive. Virtue is not something to be theorized. It is a standard that individuals should embody through choices, habits, and discipline. Each party, whether it's men or women, both focus on what men or women should be and how to extract from them. But this is arbitrary. It's completely meaningless. When you lead a good life and you are a good person, the rest will naturally filter in. Obsessing over the obscurities of the quote-unquote high-value archetype does nothing but absolve you of the responsibilities of becoming one, of becoming someone who is indeed high value. It is much easier to nitpick and theorize than it is to actually implement in practice. Now for the next section, we're going to refute common claims, but before I do that, I'm going to cook a New York strip steak. Gotta get the protein in, and I'm sick of talking. Okay, we are back, and that steak I just made, it was so peak. It was genuinely so good. I'll insert a little photo here. But anyways, now that I'm rejuvenated, now that we've established the foundations with psychology and philosophy, now let's refute the common claims. I need to first interrogate common narratives and premises before I get into positing a healthier model. And again, this section is primarily going to focus on untangling women's perspective of men. I'll occasionally reference men's perspective of women and try to break that down as well. However, I want to focus more on women for this video, just because I mostly want to focus on breaking down the pink pill. I feel like there's already plenty of videos on the internet breaking down red pill. But anyways, let's begin with the first claim that all men are cheaters and unfaithful by nature. This first claim is going to be a hasty generalization. In case you don't know what that is, this is a good moment for me to mention that my first YouTube video is an introduction to logic, and in that video I go into common fallacies, and this is one of them. Anyways, I digress. This is a hasty generalization typically rooted in trauma and compulsion. Red pill men are also not exempt from this. They also tend to make this argument that all women cheat, all women are unfaithful, and these men are merely the overlooked loyal ones. But what most people don't realize is this is a form of fatalism, the belief that all events are predetermined and therefore inevitable, posturing as realism. And the particular issue I take with this kind of sentiment is that it essentially claims that infidelity is a fixed nature of men or women, and wisdom is to expect it. However, before I propose a counter framework, note what is fundamentally flawed here. This fatalism collapses distinctions of character and, under the guise of prudence, selects for the very men it presumes. It repositions moral failures such as infidelity as something immutable, something unchanging within an individual. Saying, quote, all men cheat, unquote, paints every man with the same brush, and by extension positions infidelity as a biological predisposition, something sex-based, when in reality, not all men cheat and not all women cheat. Even inductively, the claim fails. else. Even if I were to grant that a majority of men or women were indeed unfaithful, which statistically is inaccurate, a single counterexample falsifies the claim that all men are unfaithful. It is a completely reductionist and illogical perspective, as it is impossible to prove that all men do indeed cheat. And a bit of food for thought: the more economically dependent a woman is on a man, the more likely he is to cheat. So the very ideology urging dependence for safety funnels women into dynamics that breed betrayal. Anyways, I digress. Not all men cheat. This is not only evident empirically and logically, but it's also evident by the philosophies that propagated otherwise. Plato argues education forms desire. Aristotle argues that character is built by discipline and habit. Marcus Aurelius that a man must govern his own mind. Instead of universalizing, search for virtuous behaviors, such as truth-telling, repair after conflict, restraint even when faced with temptation, rather than preemptively assuming a lack of fidelity. Universalizing a gender only results in individuals overlooking the particulars because they believe it is futile to begin with. The second claim: men must pay and provision proves love. Some women genuinely believe the only way to know a man is serious about you is if he pays for your bills and funds your luxuries, which unfortunately ends up reinforcing this red pill narrative that all women are hypergamous, and then that goes on to fuel the cycle of contempt. But before deconstructing this claim, there's a deeper layer worth naming. In traditional marital systems, particularly those involving non-consensual dowry determined by the husband and the father, institutionalized a form of exchange where a woman's sexual and reproductive exclusivity became bound to property and lineage. In this context, provision became an early economic codification over female sexuality. If we resurrect that logic through a frame of men must pay for your sex, why would the modern version be desirable now? Is it only morals at play, or is there a political economy of courtship we are reenacting under softer names? And if provision is truly the test of love, I want you to ask, what history are you reviving and whom that history served? Because it most certainly wasn't women. Now, in terms of refuting this claim, first of all, women are not entitled to provision outside of marriage by virtue of being a woman. I hate to break it to you, I know this is going to piss some people off, but there is no logical or empirical basis for this. It is completely rhetorical. I always see women trying to frame this as if it's something that should be objective, that all men must pay for women, even outside of marriage, even in just the case of courting. And unfortunately, I have to say it is cope. If being provided for makes you feel cared for, call it a preference, that is perfectly fine. But it is not a universal moral obligation, and you really can't prove it to be. No man is secularly obligated to pay your billers or even the dinner tab simply because you are a woman. And don't get me wrong, like I said, I already know this is going to piss some people off, but just listen to me. I too like to feel looked after. It makes me feel good. I get it. I like the idea of going to dinner and the man pays. It makes me feel like he's taking initiative. But if I go to dinner with a man, or a man is courting me, and he doesn't want to pay, I'm not going to disparage him. I'll simply just find someone whose values align with my own. Not to mention, financial provision is not the pinnacle of love's truest expression. There's a difference between a wealthy man and a generous man. The wizard Liz and Shira 7, for example, argue a man should pay. Liz often cites motherhood and children to justify this, and to that I agree. When responsibility and labor fall more heavily on a wife and a mother, a loving partner should compensate and make her life easier. That's kind of intuitive, but without marriage, without children, without motherhood, there is no inherent imbalance. Neither individual is intrinsically entitled to provision by virtue of gender. It is an agreed upon preference. And before we move on to the next claim, I want to get into a deeper structural problem with this claim. If money is the proxy, both parties will optimize the proxy. Women get compliance and display, not care and devotion. In this kind of dynamic, means become ends and the relationship eventually hollows and collapses. And as you optimize provision, a man who likewise treats money as a proxy will optimize leverage. Nothing is free, nothing is free, nothing is free, nothing is free. No amount of money is worth selling independence and dignity. It is not only extremely dangerous, but it's generally unproductive to be solely dependent on another for your provision. If your husband wants to be your financial backbone, beautiful, beautiful, great man, he's so kind, but it's important you pursue your own passions and ambitions alongside him. And I forgot to get into this earlier, I think I might go into it deeper later in the video, but when you make money the proxy, what ends up happening is you end up getting performance. So your focus is essentially tunnel visioned on money, and rather than looking at other important things or things that that should be the proxy, like for example character, discipline, manners, whatever it may be, you're not focusing on these things, you're focusing on the money he spends on you and what he gives you materially. So now what is he going to do? Because he knows that's what you value, he's going to outperform in that respect and not show you where else he's lacking. But again, like I said, I'm going to get into this deeper later into the video. But let's move on to the next claim, which is that women are the prize and femininity is being passive. This claim structures value around being chosen, and being chosen is said to only be attainable by cultivating appearance, persona, docility, and expense. Not only does this reinforce an already non-objective constructivist blueprint of woman, it also enables grandiosity and encourages excessive dependence on external selection. Plato himself argues that women have the same basic nature and pursuits as men, differing only in comparative strength. Their original nature is the same, and by this virtue, just as men are expected to be morally virtuous contributors to society, so are women. Women, like men, should be trained as guardians. They too are responsible for society and the young. You are not valuable to society merely by virtue of being a woman, and likewise a man is not valuable merely by virtue of being a man who provides. Value is derived from purpose, education, and flourishing. An individual becomes valuable by investing in the self, honing craft, work, knowledge, friendships, and service. Excellence in the self is what is the attraction, not sexual appeal or provision. And I would presume someone who values sexual appeal and provision over general character is probably a fucking hedonist, so I don't take you seriously to begin with. Next claim, men only want sex, so play dark feminine games to win. In case you don't know what dark feminine games means, it essentially means like emotional detachment, intermittent reinforcement type shit. It's a psychological phenomena in which a principle is conditioned by rewarding desired behavior unpredictably. However, what people don't understand about healthy relationships is coldness and feigned indifference does not secure respect and resources. It cultivates an unhealthy and toxic dynamic that is corrosive. It selects for instability and awards avoidance. Secure partners, that is, men and women with dignity, will not continue chasing when there is no reciprocation. These tactics attract the kind of partner most likely to hurt you. They also push a narrative of male hypersexuality, which is vehemently wrong. I've written an article on this on Substack as well. But anyways, it's a perspective that diminishes women's view of sex by treating intercourse as something done to a woman, not with a woman. The final claim, emotional detachment breeds power, and it is the only way to be safe and respected. This kind of claim that we see espoused by life coaches and dating coaches and just people who subscribe to the pink pill quite literally echoes fucking Machiavelli. It is so insane to me that nobody's caught on to this. This claim aside, okay, the entire ideology and framework of Red Pill literally reminds me of Machiavelli. It is a psychological translation of his political realism. In case you don't know who Machiavelli is, he is essentially the father of political philosophy, and he's most primarily known for how he details how rulers can gain and maintain power through pragmatic and very ruthless means. He essentially advocated for leaders to be cunning, feared rather than loved, and willing to be not good for the state's stability. And his work is really interesting in terms of political philosophy. However, in the context of Red Pill and Pink Pill, what he applied to princes and states, that is, it's better to be feared than loved, cultivate distance, manage appearances, is now applied to individuals instead here. They indirectly take from his framework, and they push this belief that vulnerability invites danger and only emotional distance can command respect and safety. But we are not city-states, we are persons. What might secure a throne would corrode a relationship in a home. Not to mention this encouragement of emotional detachment is again just a coping and defense mechanism. It's trauma manifesting as a shield. Not only does it not protect you, it prevents intimacy. By withholding love, emotion, and vulnerability, you create an illusion of control. But no one can 100% control the dynamic or another person. Humans are fundamentally unpredictable. This tactic instead forecloses intimacy and inhibits true love, something that is impossible to attain without fully undressing the inner self before your partner. To be loved is to be seen and known. Bar your heart and neither is possible. This is not to say to let everyone in and abandon your boundaries, no. You can regulate your openness and be selective in moderation. Strength is an integrity-based response, not the absence of feeling. Now this will be the final part of my video. And what's going to follow is a model, not a script. And again, if you're used to watching these coaches, if you're used to watching these influencers, you tend to take everything they say at face value and you treat it as if it's a rule book, but this is not a rule book. There's gonna be lots of nuance and you have to be able to practice discernment. And if you can't, then in my opinion, you're not ready to implement these things or even consider them. Because what I'm going to propose can't be reduced to rules. Context matters, your boundaries matter, your values matter, your view of what a good life is matters, our horizons, our needs, our values, they're not gonna be identical, and that's fine. Discernment is precisely the art of reading the particular without losing sight of the universal. And remember, before we get into this, I cannot ensure you pick the right person, but I can guide you. The first thing to discuss is the difference between love and lust. Love, in my view, is a choice, and if it is not, it is lust. Love is intentional, attentive, and knowing. It's not loud, it's not performative, and it's not overwhelming. It rests quietly in the corner and it's there when you need it. Its presence is a comfort. Whereas lust is an ungoverned impulse. It's unintentional, it's reactive, it's driven by appetite. Therefore, if a man approaches you, let it be with good intentions. And from that follows a first caution. Do not be swayed by gifts or grand promises at the beginning. I'm gonna say this again because I really need to nail it in. Do not be easily swayed by gifts and grand gestures. That is not love, that is not love, that is not love. In my opinion, I think it's lust. Social media tempts us to mold a partner from a script. Expensive jewelry, luxury handbags, flowers every 2 weeks, letters, choreographed chivalry. But in my view, love has no template. It's like a fingerprint. What makes love precious is its particularity. This person's way of loving is different from everyone else's. Even if you were to individually experience the love of all 8 billion people on this earth, you will never be loved the same, and that is what's beautiful. Each person will touch your heart in a different way, and that's what makes it meaningful. And when you attempt to force men to fit into a mold or to abide by a script, you strip them of the uniqueness of their love. Some men are flashy with their affection, some are reserved and quiet. Neither is better than the other. Yeah, sure, maybe he doesn't get you flowers every month. Maybe he doesn't send you $1,000 every week. But he cooks you steak when you're on your period, helps you with your work, or helps you revise for an exam, and sits through romance movies he hates because he knows you love them. That's not underperformance, it's tailored devotion. And if you are personally content with the way that he loves, then that is sufficient. Don't let other people's perspectives or their expectations of how your partner should behave influence how you perceive their love. And I feel like society in general tends to be very harsh to both men and women about their partners. Like, oh, your girl's not doing this for you, your man's not doing this for you. Bro, if I'm happy, who cares? But for most people, they let those kinds of things get to them. They think if my partner is not doing exactly what everyone else does or what these people are telling me he should do, then he must not love me. And that's just not the case. Because as I said, everyone loves differently. And what makes that connection special and what makes his love for you special is the uniqueness of it. And now, just for kind of a disclaimer, and I'm gonna be blunt here, some men learn that conventional script and perform it to wiggle past your defenses. So for example, the conventional script is, oh, he should get you flowers once a month, he should pay for everything, he should send you money, he should buy you handbags and nice jewelry. And personally, in my opinion, just for me, if he adheres perfectly to that conventional playbook, I read it as a red flag. Performance is not character. And this is what I was referring to earlier in the video when I said performance is a red flag. Often the simple, neutral man with flaws and shortcomings proves the steadier partner than the one who curates perfection. And an additional related caution, excessive affection early on often matures into codependency. This kind of fusion feels intoxicating and it's rarely healthy. Sometimes the better partner is independent and simple, capable of warmth without swallowing your life. Now the second value. Look for balance. For example, men who are excessively hard or men who are excessively soft are ungrounded. For example, the zealot who weaponizes religious doctrine and the man who is so lax he has no centered beliefs possess the same problem. Seek someone nuanced and reasonable, philosophical in the ordinary sense, curious, intelligent, capable of questioning himself. Do not be swayed by polish or posture. Let him embody honorable values with quiet class, not advertise them. Verily, those who truly possess such characteristics need not verbalize them. And now the part I'll be crude and strict about. Discipline. A good man should be disciplined in his desires. He should not lust after aesthetics. There's a difference between a man enamored with the spectacle, such as a man who prefers a Bugatti or a Corvette, and the man who prefers understated excellence, like a man who prefers a Bentley or a horse. I'm not going to get into further details because I don't think people will like my opinions on that. However, these kinds of preferences across the board speak volumes about a person's character and class. They signal appetite management, and assess these signals with diligence. It doesn't matter what it's about. Now, sexually, discipline matters even more. Choose the man whose eyes do not wander, who is not endlessly scanning rooms and feeds to evaluate women by looks. Habit sculpts the brain, And chronic comparison and sexual evaluation neurologically wires restlessness. Sure, a man is capable of being loyal in the first flush of novelty in the beginning of a relationship, but novelty at the beginning of a relationship wanes, and appetites that are trained on variety will inevitably itch again. So choose the man for whom monogamy is beautiful, who would not only refuse an opportunity to cheat, but does not desire it, who even outside of a relationship exhibits this behavioral discipline, because that's indicative he's not just doing it for you, and he's not just being performative, but he's doing it for himself. And this applies to women as well. Women tend to exempt themselves from sexual discipline. You should also be reserved and disciplined in terms of how you engage with your sexuality, who you receive things from, how you present yourself. And I want to add on to this as well. Physical restraint isn't difficult, but what is mental restraint. Select a partner whose fidelity is not only physical but mental, as physical discipline without inward loyalty is merely inhibited appetite. And sometimes people tend to not understand what I mean when I say this, but take for example outside of a relationship, and this is something I personally implement, to the point that I'm now in a place that if you were to show me someone who's conventionally attractive, I don't feel any attraction towards them. And the reason why is because I realized growing up how important sexual discipline was. Now, whenever I saw a man who I potentially perceived to be attractive, or someone who I might have been interested in, not only did I stop verbalizing it, in the sense that, I didn't go to my friends or I didn't tell other people, oh my god, he's so fine, he's so attractive. Not only did I stop verbalizing it, but I also stopped engaging with it mentally. So even if I saw someone that I knew I would find attractive, I wouldn't even entertain the thought of, oh wow, he's really handsome. Our brains have plasticity, so what does this do? It trains my brain to not engage with other men in that way, even mentally, let alone physically or verbally. And you might think, oh well, who cares if you're not in a relationship? It's not like you're cheating on anyone, you're not disrespecting them. It doesn't harm anyone. Yeah, sure, but the reason why it's important to me and why I would want my partner to exhibit this as well is because you are training and wiring your brain. I want to give you a little thought experiment. Imagine man A. And man A constantly looks at other women, he has wandering eyes, he engages with them mentally, he's constantly categorizing women into attractive or unattractive, maybe even rating them in his head, and sometimes even verbalizing it to his friends like, oh my god, she's so bad, or she's not attractive, or oh my god, look at her bum. He trains his brain to think this is normal. And then take man B, for example, who doesn't do these things. He doesn't have wandering eyes. He doesn't engage with these things mentally, let alone does he verbalize them, and let alone does he engage with it physically. He doesn't watch porn. He doesn't do anything. And then I want you to place both of these people in a relationship. And like I said, I already agree that in the first flush of novelty, it is likely that they're both going to be loyal. That's not hard. But because your brain is already wired to engage with women in a certain way, the moment that you guys start to hit a rough patch or you're getting deeper into the relationship, it is more likely that man A is going to exhibit behaviors that are not only hurtful but potentially disrespectful to his partner. Whereas man B, irrespective of the status of his relationship, irrespective of the status of his partner, is always going to exhibit these behaviors because those were things that he personally valued and that he already trained himself to be used to. And I'm pretty sure there was also a study conducted on this. I don't know where it is, so take this with a grain of salt. But I'm pretty sure they looked at the brain activity of men and they found that men who tend to be a lot more disciplined, when they saw a conventionally attractive woman, they were capable of not engaging with that mentally, in the sense that they shut down that engagement. So they would see a flash of activity in that brain region and then it would quickly decline. Whereas men who are not disciplined continued engaging mentally and activity in that region of the brain persisted. So there are men out there who have a level of neurological restraint. There's also women out there who do as well. And so that's what I'm emphasizing here. But anyways, I digress. I've been saying that a lot this video. Let these virtues be things that he already exhibits for himself, not something he trains for you, because this isn't a reliable foundation. And yes, I briefly mentioned it earlier, but I'll say it plainly. Do not settle for a man who watches porn. This is intuitive. Cuckoldry is a disease. And if you're a man, don't settle for a woman who watches porn. Now for the third value, which is keeping money in its lane. Money is of course important, but it is merely a tool, not a test or a reference of love. Provision can be beautiful inside a partnership, but money is not love's measure. If you make money the proxy, both of you will optimize that proxy. You will get display and leverage, not devotion. And likewise, do not demand identical love languages. People love in different ways, people love to different capacities, and that's okay. The point is not conformity, it is recognizable care. So consider, does this person's way of loving land as love for me? If not, you say so concretely and kindly. and then watch if he learns. A teachable heart is a better predictor than a theatrical gesture. Additionally, mature love is not necessarily identical performance, it's complementary contribution. If one is strong in logistics and another in tenderness, their love is the weave, each covering each other's gaps. Love is a mutual audit of needs and strengths. It doesn't require equality. It is noticing where the other is thin and quietly compensating for where they're lacking. And it doesn't keep score, as love is not a ledger, but reciprocal caretaking. And a final note on the creator economy, which I mentioned earlier, as viewers, we see a lifestyle and we want that advice to be true so that our lives can match that of the speaker. But the reality is that creators and coaches feed on that desire and that want. It is a bi-directional loop in which they profit off of your yearning and then use said profit to further reinforce their lifestyle. It's not the men in their lives doing that. And then they sell it for you to consume again. It is your responsibility, our responsibility, to break this loop. Your life is not a channel and intimacy is not content. And then for this final section, I'm just going to go over general practices that I think people should implement in their relationships that I think will protect it. I'm just going to read off the list here. It's going to be pretty quick, and then we're going to go into what makes someone, a high value female, a high value man, and all that nonsense. First and foremost is transparency. It's something I'm personally very big on. It's my number one value. Honesty answers when asked, whereas transparency speaks up unprompted. If you know what matters to me, my boundaries, my sensitivities, my standard for truth, you honor that and you tell me things without being pressed about it. You recognize my fundamental right to know and you honor that, and you're prepared to take accountability when needed. And furthermore, you say what is true even if it costs you admiration. The next thing is fatal flaws. Every person has at least one fatal flaw, likely non-fixable, so identify it early on and decide whether or not you can live with it without resentment, or whether it violates your non-negotiables. And to be clear, things like abuse, contempt, chronic deceit, and coercive control are not flaws to accommodate. Next one is community. Let friends and family see him and engage with him. Borrow their eyes. They will notice what infatuation does not. And on that previous note, the next one is privacy. Involving the community does not mean publicizing your relationship. Honor your partner. While it's healthy to seek counsel from a small, trusted few, it is unhealthy to narrate every single conflict to everyone. Let's say something big happens between you both. You might forgive him, but others will not. If you only report what he gets wrong in your relationship, they will form a skewed contempt that can poison your bond. And their biases can distort your perception too. No one knows your relationship better than you, and if you want outside objectivity, curate an objective sample. When you're talking to people, share the whole picture, not just the worst parts. Next thing is repair. Conflict is inevitable, and that's okay. Relationships are not meant to be perfect. Fights and disagreements are the perfect time for emotional intimacy, not indifference and distance. Learn what works for you both, practice repair, and don't over-intellectualize things. Sometimes simplicity is best. Next one is pace. Refuse speed and velocity. Take time to observe him and your relationship in varied settings: work, stress, family, grief, disappointment, and especially boredom. And finally, last but not least, character. Who he is when no one is watching is most important. Does he have integrity, humility, steadiness under pressure, kindness to those who cannot benefit him, grounded beliefs? Can he apologize and repair? Is he capable of emotional regulation, holding a job, or maintaining friendships? How does he treat his mother and sister? How would he treat his potential daughter? Does he and would he treat you with the same love, commitment, and respect as he would his mother, his sister, and especially his daughter? What is his view on women as a whole? Could you see him being a good father to your children while simultaneously being a good husband to you? These are all reflective of his character and they need to be considered. Now, the last thing that I wanted to get into before I wrap this video up is the concept of high value woman, high value man. The phrase high value has become an ontology. It's no longer just a descriptor, but like a metaphysical claim, a declaration that some humans are worth more than others and that their worth can be priced, measured, and audited through beauty, income, sexual access, status, deference, or obedience. However, ethically, men and women are not different kinds of beings. They're not different species of moral patient. They do not possess different intrinsic rights by virtue of sex, nor different fundamental obligations. Both are human, both are ends in themselves, both are capable of moral reasoning, moral failure, and moral repair. Both can be ambitious, disciplined, corrupt, generous, parasitic, faithful, hedonistic, or self-sacrificial. To pretend otherwise is to regress into the same metaphysics that made women ornamental and men disposable, and now repackaged as dating advice. Simply put, what I'm saying here is there's no such thing as a high value man or a high value woman, at least in the way the internet frames it, because value begins at personhood. There's only a high value person, and I'll get into this later, but high value man or high value woman is just a form of stylizing this kind of virtue. Being high value is merely an individual's capacity for virtue, the ability to govern appetite, to will good, to tell the truth at cost, to restrain impulse, to endure discomfort without becoming cruel, to remain principled when no one is watching. It's not masculine, it's not feminine, this is just human. So when people ask me what should I look for in a partner, what makes someone high value, the answer is look for what makes someone a good person. Because the ethical spine of a high functioning man and a high functioning woman is fundamentally the same. The difference is not essence but expression. And this is what I think gives rise to what I like to call stylized forms of being. And admittedly, I haven't fully articulated this or solidified my opinions on it. However, I believe we have things such as the sub-man and the sub-woman, and they're merely social roles that compress a person into function. So when people say that a high-value woman is feminine, what I think they actually mean is that she merely performs sub-woman well, and likewise applies in the case of masculinity. And the reason why I bring this up is because I had some people comment on my article, particularly men, asking me, like, why didn't you go into more of what it means to be, like a high value woman or a good woman? And the reason why I didn't get into that is because most of the things that I said women should value in men can easily be mapped back onto women as well. And I think if you have just some discernment and you think about it a little bit more, it's very easy to figure out which ways they map back onto women, especially socially. The values I referenced throughout this article, and especially in the past few minutes, are not sex-based. I just think they're fundamental virtues that a morally good person would exhibit. So nonetheless, I'm tangenting. Let me wrap this up. Basically what I'm saying is, I don't think that there's necessarily this intrinsic high value man or high value woman. I think when we talk about high value, we're just talking about persons. However, socially, we do have ways in which we prefer that these persons behave depending on whether or not they are women or men. And so a high value woman would basically just be a high value person that is adjacent to femininity, and a high value man would be a high value person that is adjacent to masculinity. But anyways, now that I've gotten that all out, I want to shift to the closing statements of this video. First, by talking about becoming the kind of person that your love requires. So knowing how to love and how to choose does not mean being fastidious in respect to others while excusing yourself. You must embody the very qualities that you seek. Recall the core flaws of the ideology we rejected: hypocrisy and grandiosity. You are not the prize, and neither is he. The relationship in its actualized state is the prize. That shared good that you both pursue. Treat him with respect as he's your other half. He's an extension of you. Do not demand what you yourself cannot sustain. Love him as you wish to be loved. Not as a commodity, not as an accessory to a fetishized lifestyle, but as a human being with a history, limits, and dignity. You are both two persons, both new at living, both once children, and both learning as you go. When it comes to your partner, lead with empathy, kindness, and forgiveness. This is hopefully the person that you will love most for the rest of your life. And so let your conduct be worthy of that fact. Do not harm each other. Think of each other as mutual extensions, and view everything about each other through a lens of deep and profound sensitivity. And if you do this, you are bound to have an actualized, meaningful, and loving relationship. And on that note of relationships, because that's all we've been talking about this entire video, it's important to remind you that self-authorship is the pinnacle of individual actualization, and that is what you should be striving for. Relationships are not the curriculum of your life. They are similar to an elective you take once you are close to completing your degree or chosen major. Do not center men, and if you're a man, don't center women, or relationships as your primary telos. Center finding purpose and self-authorship. Focus on your friends, work, study, community, faith, service, and health. Learn to be well while you are alone, because solitude is not a punishment. It is the greatest blessing where discernment and peace is found. When you build a life with ends beyond optics, you stop bargaining for worth and start filtering with ease. So essentially, you're not desperate for anyone good that comes into your life. The right person doesn't require hunting or extensive searching. They are found along the journey, on your path to finding your purpose, and they are drawn in by the steadiness of your character, and they accompany you. So focus on self-authorship. Don't think about, will love ever arrive in my life, because that's not the concern. You can find love and you can find relationships and you can find meaning in other ways, by community, by family. You don't need to be in a relationship. It is okay to be alone. Authorship is enough. Your days still have meaning. And if you never find that person in your life at any point, that is okay too. Solitude is far more preferable than selling yourself to something undignified. This is probably going to be one of my longest videos, but I felt like it was really important, and I think a lot of people need this advice, and a lot of people are lost today when it comes to relationships. And so, just to conclude this video, if there's a single thread through philosophy, Plato and Aristotle, Marx and Beauvoir, and the Council of Marcus Aurelius, it is this: do not trade authorship for adornment, nor people for products. We are to become subjects, agents with ends, who love by choice, who serve a purpose. Transactional arrangements, red pill, they can stage romance, but they cannot found one. What is purchased is always provisional, whereas what is formed in virtue becomes a way of being. Choose the good that cannot be purchased, because only that can truly last. Let love then be something you do on purpose. Keep money as a tool, not a measure, and choose a partner whose character is honorable and respectable. And likewise, become the partner who is honorable and respectable. Compensate for where each of you lack without keeping score. And if there is any test, it's not a Birkin or a bill. It is whether your life together enlarges your soul, your tenderness, and your freedom. And overall, women are not objects to be bid on, and men are not wallets to be emptied. Women are not the prize, and neither are men. Instead, the relationships we write are the prize. And understand the bargain. Choosing a man's provision as your main aim is choosing comfort over challenge. It will never make you revered, it will never make you powerful, and it will never make you important. It'll only make you ornamental. Refuse that cage, refuse the comforts, that familiarity for something far greater, something far more actualized. Choose discernment over cynicism, reciprocity over leverage, and becoming over importance. And let your love, unmarketed and unperformed, be quiet enough to last. And if you still find that you have not met someone who compliments you and helps you progress towards a better self, then be alone. That is okay too. Remember, I also wrote this article on Substack, so if you want to check it out on there as well, it's essentially the same thing, but I have other articles I've also written on the immorality of polygamy, the myth of male hypersexuality, the God complex, and so forth. And I'm currently working on many other articles, at least when I have the time with school. And again, I am not monetized on YouTube right now, so if you want to support me in any way, my Substack has a subscription option. I am incredibly grateful to anyone who subscribes, like genuinely every dollar counts, and it genuinely helps me as a college student, and it helps motivate me to make this kind of content for you guys. I also have other options if you don't want to subscribe on Substack. I have a Buy Me a Coffee, and I also have subscriptions on TikTok and my Instagram as well. And if you aren't able to support me in those ways, a follow is good enough, and just engaging with my content. Make sure to follow me on my other platforms. I give most of my updates on Instagram, but I'm also active on TikTok and other platforms as well. And if you have any thoughts, be sure to leave them in the comments, and please be constructive, please be kind. And I'll see you guys in my next video whenever I feel like posting. It's likely that by the time I posted this, I'll be back in school, so my activity might decline after this. Okay, bye!